On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
And to my very good and dear friend, Erwin, it is because of him that I am here. When he first mentioned this to me as we were sitting having lunch in Jerusalem in April of 2022, I said, "Oh no, Erwin, I couldn't possibly take it on. It's too big, it's too incredible." And it didn't take very long before my own heart and soul convinced me that, in fact, this was exactly what I should be taking on.
That's what it sounded like on October 16th, 2023, in Ottawa, when Liberal cabinet ministers of the day joined Canada's Nobel Prize-nominated human rights lawyer Irwin Cotler to present his successor as a second federally appointed special envoy to preserve Holocaust remembrance and to fight anti-Semitism. It happened just a week after the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, which led to an explosion of anti-Israel protests on the streets of Canada. It took Cotler a lot of arm twisting to convince Deborah Lyons that she was the right fit for the post. The thinking was it might be best to have an experienced global affairs diplomat to serve as the government's point person on anti-Semitism. Lyons had served in some tricky countries facing conflict. She'd previously been head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, and before that she was Justin Trudeau's first ambassador to Israel after he took office in 2015. And having someone who was not Jewish may have raised eyebrows, but he hoped it might open more doors to speak to Canadians about standing up to hatred. During her term in office, Lyons successfully lobbied to get a bigger budget. She hired more staff, and then she made helping Canada's Jewish university students a priority. Her office produced a handy guide to help public servants understand and recognize anti-Semitism using a definition which the Canadian government adopted in 2019 called the IRA definition. And just last week, her office released a survey of some of the shocking problems faced by Jewish kids in Ontario's public schools. In May, Lyons celebrated her 75th birthday. Her family was urging her to find joy in life again after she spent over 600 days waking up each morning to a fight, having people not want to speak to her because of her job as champion of the Jewish community, and because of the silence she says she received from much of the business world, faith leaders, and even politicians who she said found it easier to tackle auto theft and tariffs than hate.
We're not going to corral people into their battlefields and say only you can fight for yourselves because the rest of us are off picking blueberries or going to hockey games.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, July 23rd, 2025. Welcome to North Star, a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Although there's no mandatory retirement age for her job the way there is for Canadian Supreme Court justices or senators, being in the ring, as Lyons calls it, 24/7 since October 7th, has been the toughest job she has ever had. But Lyons says she decided to step down 3 months early with a heavy heart. She feels the work isn't done. She regrets she wasn't able to bring Canadians together to stand up for each other, that people didn't want to meet with her for a respectful dialogue. And while there were pockets of solidarity, she feels Canadians have been mostly bystanders and should receive poor marks for their reluctance to stand up and speak out against hate, including hate against the Jewish community. The outgoing special envoy joins me now from her family cottage in New Brunswick, where jam making is underway, and she tells us why whoever replaces her should be Jewish.
Great to be with you again, Ellen.
Well, our listeners have been concerned about why you decided to leave 3 months early, some for worried about your health, others for other reasons. Can you tell us why you stepped down?
I think it was simply time. This is a job that certainly from the beginning of October 2023 and, after the horrific attack in Israel, really this job turned upside down, as I think the lives of many of us. And it was 24/7, Ellen, without question for the first year, 24/7. And pretty much 24/6 for the second year, if not 24/7. And as someone who had been a diplomat and abroad for about 13 years consecutively, coming home to Canada, trying to retire, not doing a good job of it, then going into a job like this, I think my family just said, "Okay, enough is enough, mom, grandma. You gotta just hang out with us and enjoy some of life." Now, having said that, Ellen, let me make really clear. Absolutely, I have left the position, and I've left it strong, I feel, with a strong base for my successor, and we can talk more about that. But I am not leaving the issue. I am not leaving, the compassionate United Canada that I insist we are going to continue to work hard for. I'm not leaving the issue of anti-Semitism or Holocaust remembrance. I will just find other ways of contributing and probably do it more on a part-time basis than 24/7.
So was it a health or mental health reason too, that this the strain and the stress, your family was worried?
I think I've always been pretty sturdy when it comes to mental health. There's no question that this job was one that tore at you physically and emotionally. I mean, I faced a lot of hate out there myself directed at me, a lot of nasty, words and in some cases actions. But I've dealt with that before in some of the conflict postings that I've had. No, I think, I'm a maritimer. I didn't want to miss another maritime summer. As my sister jokingly said, Deborah, you got confused with Freedom 55. You thought it was Freedom 75. It's time.
Right.
At some point you have to stop. And I think just, restore your batteries, get a little bit of the joy back into life. This was every day waking up to a fight. And I mean, every day waking up to a fight and having a lot of people angry at you all the time. And by that, I mean people on all sides of this discussion and debate. There are multiple layers to what we have gone through in the last 2 years. I learned a lot, Ellen, and I think that learning is not something I want to just put in a box and store in the basement. I want to continue to contribute. I think I learned a lot about courage. I think I learned a lot about bystanders and how, as the saying goes, the mark of a country is not the courage of its military, it is the courage of its bystanders.
And how is Canada doing in that regard?
I would say that during this period, these last 2 years, I've been really quite amazed and often become quite despondent and despairing about the fact that it was hard to get people to speak up, to speak with clarity, to speak with conviction about what we were seeing happening here on Canadian soil. Yes, there are all kinds of issues with what's happening in the Middle East, and we should be directing ourselves to those issues as well. But if we can't deal with what's happening in a growing hatred on our own soil, what does that say about us? Not just as leaders, by the way, but as everyday citizens. It was a constant discussion with people about why are you not standing up? Why are you not saying something? What do you need? And I guess, Ellen, I would say that what I did find is that there were things that people needed in order to feel comfortable enough to stand up.
What do they need?
They needed help in finding the right words because people became, partly because of social media, but not just social media, people became concerned about, but if I say this, am I going to insult somebody else? Am I going to hurt somebody else? Like, what is the right tone that I should take? And then when it came to actions, what would be the right actions? Because if I do this for this community, do I have to do it for another community? Or does it look like I'm favoring one over the other? I had one of the ministers say to me I was very impressed with him, our former Minister of Defense, Minister Blair, and he said, in different times in my political career, when a community is hurting, I stand up for that community. And then when another community is hurting, I stand up and I stand with that community. I say to each of these communities, I haven't left you. It is just that this is the community that needs me the most right now, and I need to take a stand and be courageous. And I was very impressed with him for saying that. I didn't get that clarity from business leaders who I asked many times to stand up, and I was incredibly disappointed with business leaders. And I have to say, we have a tendency to want to blame politicians all the time, but where have the faith leaders been? Where have the priests and ministers and rabbis and imams and so forth, where have they been bringing us all back together as children of God?
Well, I know recently, June 24th, there was a summit of
Yes.
700 Christians and Jews. This is the Simeon Summit, which the media wasn't invited to, but we know about it. Yeah.
I was certainly invited to it and unfortunately couldn't make it, but my staff were there. And Andrew Bennett did, as Andrew does, a fantastic job with many people. And that was absolutely excellent. I think also, educators standing up, teachers standing up, university presidents. We've gone through this many different times, but also just the everyday citizen, reaching out to the Jewish community and saying, how can I be helpful? I want to hear what you're going through and so forth. So I think as a result of, watching and being a part of all this happening and having, in many cases, not just a front row seat, but being in the ring as the battle was raging, I actually connected with a number of other people who've been studying the whole aspect of bystanders. And what does this mean throughout history? And I think it's something right now that Canada has to be thinking about. And again, what is it that makes it so difficult? Hate is not car theft. It's not even tariffs, which are tangible, concrete, and you can somehow get your head around addressing that issue. Hate is a little more amorphous and obtuse. And I think, frankly, we're struggling with how do we face it head on and address it. And I think that that's something we've got to do a lot more thinking about, and we need to improve our performance.
So are you giving Canadians a failing grade on standing up to hate?
I'm not sure. No, I don't think I would give Canadians a failing grade on that. I think we are still one of the most spectacular countries when it comes to a decent society, when it comes to social programs, when it comes to caring for one another. I think this recent test in these last 2 years have brought us a little bit to our knees. And I think that I wouldn't give it a failing, but I certainly wouldn't give it top mark.
Is it fixable? And you're leaving and with heavy heart. You said those words.
Yeah. Well, I use those words because I would love to continue in the job, and it was without question the toughest job I ever did. Yeah. But I would say that it was the most meaningful and the most powerful in the sense that you get to see the underbelly of society. You get to see where we're strong, but you particularly get to see where we're weak, and you get to work on those issues. So even though pretty much every day ends with a level of dissatisfaction because you never got enough done and because more issues arose than you could deal with, you could feel that you were at least making a contribution that was critical, however sparse it may be at the moment, but you were also getting an exceptional understanding of where we are weakening as a society, not just us, the Western world. Frankly, I think the whole world is tilted these days, and we're continuing to tilt, and we're going to have to figure out a way of getting us back to our center, back on course, because it's pretty scary out there, not just for our Jewish community, but certainly I think what is ever happening to our Jewish community is happening to all of us. So we've got to pay a lot of attention to how we address hate.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp. its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
You were said earlier, and I want to pick up on something that I've been curious about. You said you got a lot of hate. Your predecessor and colleague and mentor, Erwin Kotler, had death threats against him. He had to be on 24/7. Is that what you were alluding to, that you personally also had death threats too?
So let's be clear. What Irwin has had to deal with is something quite separate and distinct and involves particular country. In my particular case, it was, nasty stuff on social media, of course, some threatening emails, some, going into events, as you said, speeches and so forth. In some cases, losing colleagues, in some cases losing friends who were not happy with me doing the job and thought that I was. So, I mean, just the kind of thing that, you have to deal with when you are in the middle of a critical issue that is fraught with multiple emotions from so many different perspectives. But what I'm hoping Canada will do, so we'll do right by our Jewish community. We'll do right by all our communities. I think we've had incredible progress in the last 50 years, and we can't lose that. But I think this past 2 years has taught us not to be complacent, that there are many areas now that need additional attention and additional fixing, whether we're talking about people not understanding anti-Semitism, so more training is needed, examination of policies and programs to make sure that they do not have inbuilt anti-Semitism. We're even finding surveys have their own sort of structured isolation built into them. And so that's almost a whole new science that's opening up that we're going to be exploring. And not to mention law enforcement, not to mention our legislation, not to mention how our ministers and members of parliament communicate, and not to mention, and this is critically important, Ellen, and this is where I spent many frustrating days, and that is getting the 3 levels of government, the federal, provincial, and municipal, to work together on the issue of growing hate. Why it was so much easier for them to come together around car theft, auto theft, and have a massive, important summit on it and put in place dedicated prosecutors right across the country. Again, it's tangible, it's concrete. They could address that. But we have not been able, I think, to get the 3 levels of government as yet coming together in a common front to address hate.
Well, you had the Antisemitism Forum
That was
in
exceptional.
March, right before the election, and then there was one in 2021 under Trudeau as well. So they did get together. 3 levels of government.
No. Let me clarify. First of all, the summit in 2021 was a summit on anti-Semitism. Full stop. The summit in March of this year was a summit on anti-Semitism and law enforcement. But they were trying to get it done as a leadership campaign was underway and then as election was about to be called. So it happened in short order. It did not become a full federal, provincial, municipal conference to address hate. But what happened, Ellen, and you watch this, and because I can assure you my team that I'm leaving are going to be watching it, and I will as well. The commitments made by the federal government in the press release coming out of that conference are truly exceptional. They're talking there about reviewing legislation to determine what might need to change, if any.
Bubble legislation.
I mean, it was a huge success. Now, those commitments that have been made, they even talk about having an action plan that identifies what else needs to be done, and more importantly, where they will be reporting publicly on those commitments. So everyone is aware that those commitments that were made by the previous government are solid commitments and need to and will be followed up. And frankly, Prime Minister Carney is already committed to bubble legislation publicly, as well as more money going into security infrastructure. So, we got a huge step forward with that forum. What we need, though, is much, much more attention from the provinces and the municipalities working with the feds, not just in terms of law enforcement, but in terms of the larger environment. What are we doing in our schools? What are we doing in our universities? What are we doing in our workplace?
Okay, you mentioned this government. Let me ask you about Prime Minister Carney. And to preface this, you had regular meetings with former Prime Minister Trudeau. Have you met Carney?
So, unfortunately, Prime Minister Carney asked me for a meeting, but it was after my departure date. Like I had already sent in my departure letter for July the 8th. So his calendar was, of course, pretty crazy, and we couldn't make the meeting happen before I left. But the request came from him, not from me. So I was very pleased with that. Further to that, I have been talking to senior officials in his PMO almost from the week they got elected. I'm very impressed, Ellen, with the outreach that I received, and I'm sure this is true of others, including my counterpart on Islamophobia, but I am getting an enormous amount of attention from this new government. Our team has gotten an enormous amount of attention, an exceptional amount of communication. Particularly, I am struck by how, as a new government coming in, they're going, okay, what do we need to do? What do we need to do to get this right?
But there hasn't been like photo ops, and this is a criticism that you've read to Vivian Berkovich. You didn't go to the Nova Festival with Carney and didn't go to the various events where, there was a lot more photo ops with the other one. That's all.
I don't measure my progress on photo ops. Maybe people do, and if they do, I wish them luck. But for us, we were busy getting a lot of solid work done, and never did I ever feel neglected by the Prime Minister's office, not for a second. If anything, I had a much more engaged, conversation and action plan in place with them than I'd had in the previous 6 months.
Understood. You mentioned that you're working towards finding a successor. So that means that they're going to replace you. It's not finished. That's not cutting like Polyev wanted to pull the position, remember? And the special representative for Islamophobia's position.
Yeah, it was regrettable. I tried to meet with Mr. Polyev when I was in the job, and in the end, I got a response that he was too busy to meet with me and wished me good luck in my work, which was kind of unfortunate, but also kind of reflects the way in which sometimes this conversations gets a little too politically.
Wait, so he never met with you at all in 2 years that you were there?
No, we didn't. We met at the Parliament buildings when my colleague Mihail Kotler was in town. And we had a very good conversation. He was very engaging. We had a great time. And as you know, he's got some fantastic members in his party who've been very active with me, Melissa Lantzman in particular, and Shuv and some others. I mean, they've been really, really active and really helpful. But at that time, when I first met him in the Parliament, he said, Deborah, let's get together. Please call my office and so forth. So we did, and we put in the request, and then got worried that it wasn't going to happen. So that's it.
All right. So what about the replacement? There's going to be?
Oh, I'm very confident that they're going to replace me, absolutely. No question. And we talked about several different candidates.
What was left unfinished that you want us to know that kind of is a regret?
I would like to do more on a respective dialogue, because one of my great regrets is that we did not come together as a nation the way we could have and should have. And I feel that I'm a part of that gulf. And it hurts me to think that I was a part of that gulf, that people didn't want to meet with me because of the job I was in. They didn't want to have the discussions with me. I held back from having some discussions because I knew there was going to be animosity or wasn't going to be welcome in the room. It disappoints me.
Not today, but 2 years ago, I said, let's try to get an interview with your counterpart, the three of us, online, and talk about Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and how we can together. And you even appeared with her early on in your career. You made a point to try to go together with her to events to be solidarity. And I'm wondering how that dialogue has continued, if at all, to now, or is it so far apart right now that it's too fraught, nobody's talking?
Okay, to be clear, she also tried. I mean, this wasn't just me alone. Amira also tried, of course. Let's be clear. Neither my community nor her community were happy all the time to see us in pictures together. So we were responding to the reactions of our communities as well. At the beginning, before October, she and I were going to travel together to meet with provincial ministers of education. We had great plans. We'll get back to that one day in another format, I'm hoping. But there were often people who just simply didn't want me participating in respectful dialogues or wouldn't come into the room. So that's history now. Let's move on.
Okay. I always like to try to find a silver lining, if anything. So at the end of this conversation, um, is there one anecdote or story or person you met that gives you some kind of hope?
Yeah, I mean, there were many people who I met who gave me hope, but there were too many others who dampened that hope. I would say that we spent way too much time in the negative and much less in the positive. Everybody who was engaged in this drama that is still unfolding. I think that it was the people who stood up, and I don't want to mention one name, because if I do, I'll forget another name. And I think there were a number of people who are out there trying very hard to work on behalf of their communities to a better place, both in the political world and in the community leadership. And I think those people who were trying to move forward on respectful dialogue. I just think that we were constantly dealing with not so much a question of tone deaf, but it's just that people were listening and hearing and different frequencies. And so we just were not connecting. So that was where the big despair comes from. But there are a number of people out there who are continuing to push to try to bring those frequencies merging. And I think, frankly, Prime Minister Carney's going to work pretty hard to make that happen, from what I hear him say. And certainly the ministers I've spoken to. But I think there's a lot of people across Canada who will be joining us in that effort. But we got to get there soon. I never could have imagined that 2 years into this job, we would still have this degree of divisiveness. So lots to get done. And I'm going to go back out there after a good maritime summer and at least work part-time and keep at it, as I know you will, Ellen.
I know you had to face at the beginning the Jewish community saying, but she's not even Jewish. Why would they appoint her?
Yeah.
Are you
yeah.
over that insult now?
I was never insulted by that. Never. I mean, I frankly would never have taken this job if that kind of comment could have hurt me. If I didn't understand that to have a non-Jew fight at this particular time for the Jewish community in a country like Canada was exactly the right thing to do. Now, I surrounded myself with fabulous staff, most of whom are Jewish, but not all, and with all kinds of advisors, many of whom were Jewish, but not all. But I have said that I think that the next person replacing me probably should be Jewish, and then maybe after that, non-Jewish. Who knows? This cannot be seen as Jews having to fight for themselves. This is a matter of Canadians fighting for Jewish Canadians and for all of Canada. That's what this is about. When I'm doing this work, I'm doing it as much for a Christian child, a Muslim child, a Sikh child, a Hindi child, an Indigenous child, a Jewish child, because it's about the kind of Canada we need to have, where we're not cruel with one another, where we care about one another. And when we see someone hurting and in pain and being abandoned by our society, we step in.
I understand that. So why do you think the next one should be Jewish?
Because I think that, in fairness, alternate it, like shift it around. We should be demonstrating that we fight for one another. Like grow up, people, grow up and care.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. You can watch the full interview with Deborah Lyons on the CJN's YouTube channel, and you can read more about the story on our website at thecjn.ca. North Star is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman and Andrea Varsany. The executive producer is Michael Freeman, and the music is by Brett Higgins. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.